And good evening. Thank you for gathering here today to the final event of Discover Islam Week. My name is Zainab Dulib, and on behalf of the Muslim Students Association, I welcome you all today. I assume that we're all here to discuss race and gender in Islam. So on the topic of gender, Islam is no stranger to criticism. The faith of 1.7 billion people, Islam has faced many accusations of misogyny, of relegating women to second-class citizenship, polygamy, honor killings, female genital mutilation, you name it, Islam has been criticized for it. But how accurate are these assertions? Are these truly inherent to Islam, or are misogynistic practices wrongly ascribed to Islam when in fact they sometimes are a cultural phenomenon rather than a religious one? Do the practices of some so-called Islamic governments reflect Islam? Does Islam condone Saudi Arabia's ban on women driving and the Taliban's curtailing of girls' education? Does Islam condone the oppression of women? Does Islam perpetuate misogyny? These are all questions that we will be grappling with today. Some Muslims like myself would submit to you, in fact, the opposite, that Islam does not condone such practices, that Islam from its inception has made great strides for women's rights. Furthermore, it's also made great strides for racial equality as evidenced by the wonderful diversity of Muslims. The large majority of Muslims, more than 75%, are in fact not Arab. China has more Muslims than Syria, while Russia is home to more Muslims than Jordan and Libya combined. While Nigeria has the largest Muslim population in Africa. One of the many reasons why Islam is so racially diverse is because of its principle of racial equality. In Islam, according to the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, there is no superiority of blacks over whites or an Arab over a non-Arab, but rather we are to be judged by our taqwa, which is our innate piety, our innate mannerisms, our ethics. These are what distinguish us, not race. So today we've structured this event so that the panelists will each speak, and then at the end there will be a Q&A session for about 10 minutes, and which will end for Maghrib, the sunset prayer. You're also welcome to speak to the panelists if you have questions after the talk. Now to introduce our wonderful panelists. First we have Akilah Haneef-Jabari. She was raised as a Christian but later converted to Islam, and she credits her upbringing in North America for making her cognizant of racial oppression. Akilah graduated from McMaster University with a BA in philosophy and entered work in the municipal sector. She went on to pursue studies in not-for-profit management at York University, then adult education and staff training at Seneca College before graduating magna cum laude with a degree in social work from York University. Akilah also went on to complete her master's degree on a full scholarship from York University, and she's dedicated her life to the well-being of children and youth. Presently, she works to address systemic institutional racism in schools and child protection services. Akilah works as a clinical social worker in a male youth detention center in Ontario and is in private practice. Our other lovely panelist is Amani Hassani. She's presently working on her PhD in anthropology at Concordia. Her interests are in immigrant groups in Denmark and in Quebec. She looks at family dynamics, ethnic and religious identity, and social inequality. Her earlier works also include public health research at the University of Copenhagen and the Danish Institute for Human Rights. So I now turn the mic over to our panelists. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming our distinguished panelists.
Good evening. Should I actually put this mic on? It might be easier. Okay, is that good? Right, so I would like to begin by recognizing where we're situated, because we're sitting here in McGill University. Now, traditionally, when people talk about recognizing where they're situated before having a talk, we usually talk about recognizing that we're situated on Aboriginal or Indigenous lands. I think that's a very interesting exercise, because it does not really do anything. Sort of like, I stole your car, and when I see you at the bus stop, I honk twice and say, hey, here I am in your car. And I acknowledge that I have your car, and I'm driving and you're at the bus stop, but I never do anything about it, except for honk and say, got a car. So I'm not gonna do that, but I am gonna say that we're situated in McGill University. And it's important to me, since my topic is racism tonight, to state that James McGill was a racist. He was a slave owner. He was an oppressor of Indigenous people. And he's somebody for whom a university was erected And we, these many years later, still have his name on all your stationery. Let me see if it has a pen. And he's honored. And I find it curious because we purport to be a society that's attempting to be post-racial and post-colonial, but we maintain these structures. So part of our problem is that ignorance is no longer a problem. When ignorance was a problem, we had a solution. We could educate. But since we're way past the point of being able to hide behind the shield of ignorance, and people are still tenacious in their racist ideologies, mannerisms, and flagships to racists like James McGill, we are really struggling with where to now. I'd like to read a quote to you from Stephen Levine. Stephen Levine said, "We are motivated more by the aversion to the unpleasant than by a will towards truth or healing. We are constantly attempting to escape our life, to avoid rather than enter our pain, and we wonder why it's so difficult to be fully alive." And the reason why I'm reading that to you, Stephen Levine did a lot of his work. He was somebody who wrote extensively on death and on living as a result of when you study death, you really have to study living. And I read this quote to you because I don't know what matters other than living well. And I don't know how we situate ourselves with living well when we maintain structures of oppression and social injustice and genocide of people. So just to frame my work tonight, I wanted to start with that. Iqra is a word that is known to most Muslims or all Muslims, probably most because some were born today. Iqra means read. And when we consider the word Iqra as Muslims, we talk about pursuing education, pursuing knowledge from the cradle to the grave. And it's not necessarily formal education in terms of the walls of academia, not that, but informing yourself, learning as you go through life from cradle to grave. So the word Iqra is very important in that capacity, to read so that you can become better, so that you can learn, so that you can overcome your state of ignorance. It's a very important thing. In Islam, when Islam was at its infancy, Iqra was a word that was the heralding word towards breaking out of a state of ignorance and slumber, which the people were under. And Islam came as an opportunity to free people of ignorance and to put people into a better understanding of what the world is, what life is for, and why are you here? What are you supposed to be doing while you're here? So Iqra was a very important thing, and it maintains as a very important thing in Islam. So I was asked to talk about racism in Islam, and that's going to be my focus. My sister here will focus more on gender. So in Islam, we have no deity that's depicted. And the part of learning and overcoming ignorance at the beginning of the budding of Islam, to take people out of a state of ignorance where people used to have statues as purported deities. We came away understanding as a people that those are not gods, that there is only one God, and God is the creator of all. But we did not, as a Muslim people, depict that God. We did not say that that God has any progeny. So one of the very important things, and I know you guys have heard it because it's been in the news, one of the very important things in Islam is that there is no depiction. And I think that's extremely important when we talk about race, because we don't have a depiction. there is no tacit statement about who is closer to that look in Islam. We're not situated in terms of a race, and we do not, through depiction, have a hierarchical system of which race is superior and which race is less. So the lack of depiction in Islam is central, it's essential, and it grounds us for a system of understanding God that is without race. In fact, the lack of depiction also situates us without gender. So, as our sister indicated in the introduction, in Islam, we are considered to be the sum total of our deeds. And the value of a person is on the sum total of their deeds. So we consider ourselves as Muslims to be living our lives in such a way that we are supposed to keep central the idea that we will have to account for what we did here, that there will be a day of judgment. That's a central belief. That we will have to give account for what we've done here. And by virtue of that, we understand that it's our deeds that matter. We also understand as Muslims that when you stand before God on the day of judgment, you can't barter with, I'm white, or I'm rich, or I'm male. That kind of power that you have in this world is not of any value on the day of judgment. So it's not, we understand as Muslims that it's worth nothing. One of the most important things that we have in Islam is the Hajj. And I think the Hajj is a fantastically interesting journey. I went on Hajj in 2010, and when you go to Hajj, men do not pray in front of women, women do not pray in front of men, Muslims are praying. And it's just Muslims are praying. Everywhere there's just Muslims praying. When you go on Hajj, we are duplicating the actions, we are replicating the actions of a woman, and the woman's name is Hajar. Hajar was an Ethiopian woman, a black woman, an African woman, a black woman. And every year, millions of Muslims go to the Kaaba to replicate the actions of this black Ethiopian woman named Hajar, for which Hajj is named. And it's really interesting that she's a black woman, because when we think about racism, we think about, okay, racism and sexism are the two isms that are most popular and most problematic in our society and have been for many, many centuries. And here we make tribute to the actions of an Ethiopian woman, a black woman. So that's very interesting, I think, as a Muslim woman, to see how Islam situates race and how Islam situates gender, and how it does not in any way, shape, or form subjugate those things. We have a saying in Islam that says that heaven lies at the feet of mothers. And again, it's not literal, please don't take it literally, but it is, it's a statement that is made to show the deference that one should have towards one's mother, and the honor and the elevation in one's life that is given to one's mother. And I must say that to date, all mothers are female. To date, I have to say, because I know scientists are working on things to change that. So these are the kind of things that are the underpinnings of Islam as a foundation to its views on race and little peaks on gender. So I have never seen, as a Muslim woman, and I'm a convert to Islam, and I am sane, I have never seen any Islamic traditions or Islamic beliefs and cornerstones that are situated within racism or within sexism. But I have experienced racism and sexism with Muslims. So it's a huge difference to understand. I mean, obviously, the difference between Islam and Muslims is equal to the distance between Christians and Christianity. There's a big gap, because once you put people in the mix, everything gets very messy. Everything gets very, very messy, because people are so fallible. And we have systems, and especially the system of colonialization that we are under today, that situate us as problematic in these two areas. When we had the advent of Islam, and our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was at the forefront of this, the disruption that he made was a disruption to the social fabric, towards equality, towards social justice, and away from the ignorance that the people were steeped in. Then we fast forward several decades, a couple of centuries, to what happened in North America. We had initially, for insofar as race and the race of my people, African people of African descent in North America, were largely brought over here during the transatlantic slave trade. And many Muslims on those ships were brought across. When we got here, our Islam was eradicated. It was not allowed. People were oppressed, and they were forbidden from practicing their religion. And the humanity that we enjoyed as Muslims in Africa was stripped of my foreparents when we came here. Black people were the first Muslims in North America. And when we lost our right to be Muslims, it did not improve our lot in terms of our regaining our humanity, which was stripped of us. And I don't mean in the true sense. Obviously, we've always been human. But I'm talking about in the social sense, in the definition, in the social definition of who we were. We were subhuman by title in this land and across Europe. And when our Islam was eradicated, it did not improve our humanity in the social sense. And when we converted to Christianity, that did not improve our humanity in the social sense. And when we became secular, it did not improve our humanity in the social sense. So we had people like Malcolm X, who was very pivotal in my conversion, or reversion, as some might say. Malcolm X was not always Malcolm X. His name was Malcolm Little, and he was born as a human being. And then he was told that he wasn't really as human as he might have thought he was. And he was turned into Detroit Red, a gangster, a burglar, hood rat, as they would say today. Because that is what this little boy was told that he could be in America. And he became all that he could be. He became the biggest hustler, the biggest burglar, and ended up in prison. And that's something that happens through racism and subjugation of people's identities. Good thing for him, he found out about Islam. Bad thing about it is that he had to do a stepping stone kind of Islam. So initially he went into the Nation of Islam. And I mean, as much as it's not really Islam, it was a helping thing, because it was a stepping stone he needed to step on to get to the mainland, right, of Islam proper. So some of you must know that he rejected his name as Malcolm Little and named himself Malcolm X, and X because he didn't know the name of his foreparents, and he rejected the Little, which was obviously a slave owner's name. But Islam was not really true in that sense, in the sense of the Nation of Islam. It was just a kind of Islam that purports that white people are the devil. So if people look at that and say that that's Islam, they might say there's racism in Islam. But there wasn't any racism in Islam because that wasn't really Islam. And thankfully, Malcolm X grew and he went on Hajj and he realized what anybody would realize if they have both eyes open and they go on Hajj, and that is that there is no racism and there is no sexism in Islam proper. So he ended up changing his name again, and of course when we change our name, it's like a rebirth. He changed his name again, he became Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, and he entered into the true religion of Islam. That journey that he went from saying that white people are the devil and he hates all white people, to accepting true Islam and saying that white people are our brothers and sisters. We are all brothers and sisters, and we lose something when we lose sight of that fact. That's when you could tell that he was actually a Muslim, because that is the true teaching of Islam in its authentic way, without the cultural stuff that Muslims might bring to the mix. So we had a situation where people would call Malcolm X a racist. They would say that his ideology was racist, and I would say that it was discriminatory and it was against white people, but it wasn't truly racism. And I'm going to read you the definition of racism to say why. Because I think a lot of people even to today think that people can be racist without power. That is something I would challenge. So the definition of racism is a system of social controls, domination that is based on the social constructed interpretation of skin color and facial features generated throughout the process of white colonialization across the globe. It is culturally bound and contextual, socioeconomically maintained and reproduced. The linchpin of racism is power. So this is not in any way, shape, or form something that you would find within any definition of Islam. There's no reading within Islam where you'd see this. But you will see this in social systems. And since we are now in a colonial, and I know people say it's post-colonial, a lot of people say post-colonial. If you end up in university, you'll say post-colonial. There's no such thing as post-colonial except for the word. For as long as this is McGill University, people shouldn't be saying post-colonial in this place. Obviously, our system is a system of colonialism that is strong and wrong to today. The linchpin of racism is power. So there is no such thing as somebody who looks like me being a racist. I can't be a racist any more than I can be a sexist. Because you need power to back that up, okay? So racism is a system. It is not about one person calling another person a name that doesn't really matter because you don't have power over them. It's a system. We did not have, and we do not have that system in Islam. In Islam, we have a system of social justice. So we have Muslims who fight for social justice. And we recognize that social justice is central to Islam, and it is something that opens the floodgates to conversion. So you take somebody like me now, who was born here, born in Ontario, raised in North America. I was born a person. And I was told that I could learn to read and write. My mother taught me to read and write. I didn't know until I went to school. I went to school at age 6. I didn't know until the first day of school that I was a nigger. That's when I found out, because on the first day of school, that's what I was called. I didn't really know what the word meant, but I knew it was really, really, really bad. Because there's an energy to that word. You know what I mean? When somebody calls you something, you don't know language when you're 6 months old, but if someone calls you something, you can feel that. You can feel that communication that the person's putting upon you. So I felt it, and I was really disturbed that my mother didn't tell me that prior to me going to school. But I found out that I was considered, and this is what racism does. Racism tries to strip you of your identity and rename you and resituate you as less than human and as doomed. So I was situated thus, and I went to a school where there were 2 black children, my sister and I. She's 18 months older. So you can imagine, I mean, maybe not, depending on what you look like. You might imagine my experience. So those experiences shaped me. Those microaggressions and macroaggressions shaped me. And I can tell you that more than the children who called me nigger, the educators who stood silent and listened to that and had nothing to say about it, probably because they would have said it themselves if they could get away with it, they were worse than the kids. Because the only thing that is more damning in our society than the overt racist is the silent bystander who allows that to happen. You know, especially when they're situated in positions of power. So racism is a social cancer. And it is a social cancer that robbed me of a carefree life. A lot of white people have carefree lives vis-a-vis race. And a lot of white men have carefree lives vis-a-vis sexism. But that's not the kind of thing that can be afforded a black child, unless of course you have your 2 eyes closed. You can do that. I've met people who've done that. But I had my 2 eyes open. So I felt that social cancer of racism from the age of 6. And by the time I was 11 years old, I hated white people. And my mother was scared for me. She was scared for me. Because to be a black girl child, then living in the United States of America and hating white people, it can be dangerous. If you're 11, it's not so bad, but you just imagine what would happen when I got older. When I got older, I found Islam. And I went to Islam because Islam, it was the only thing that I saw that could be a balm on my heart to help me to endure in this life that is so full of micro and macro aggressions against people who look like me, and redefining of someone who looks like me as being subhuman, ignorant, lesser than, marginalized. I found Islam like Malcolm X found Islam as his savior. I found Islam as my savior, and I found it through the readings of Malcolm X in part, and in bumping into Muslims at McMaster University when I was an undergraduate student there. I was so happy to find Islam and to read a doctrine where I could actually be a human being and where I didn't even hate white people. Literally, after reading the doctrines of Islam, I stopped hating white people. And I started seeing that white people are actually people. And I'm a person and they're people, so we could all just be people. In the ideal sense, that would be true. I met white Muslims. They called me sister. They treated me like I was their sister. And it was a really cool situation. You know how everything has a honeymoon? You know how there's always a honeymoon, right? Everything's perfect until you actually move in and it's like, oh man, I didn't know this guy left his socks on the floor. Don't like to cook, doesn't know what a stove looks like. Well, I don't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. But I found out. And what I found out was that Islam is a balm for my heart. Muslims, not so much. Not so much. Islam could actually be a cure for the plight of the social cancer that racism is. However, there's Muslims operating it. So that's the big downfall to Islam. it really is problematic that there's Muslims in it. If we just had no Muslims and just Islam, everything would be great. But we would still have to put Islam up against colonialism, because colonialism is such an entrenched system globally that Islam is up against in terms of social justice, that is the work that needs to be done. So as a Muslim, I came in and I put on hijab. I became a Muslim at the age of 24. Yeah, that was a long time ago, right? And I put on the hijab, and actually started wearing hijab before I became a Muslim, because I was a philosophy student, and that's why I became a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim because I'm religious, not at all. I'm actually not a religious person. I'm a person who's in pursuit of truth and social justice, and I ended up in Islam as a result of that. So I came into Islam because I was a philosophy student, and at the age of 20, I said to myself, I am going to live my life in accordance with the truth. As a philosophy student coming up against Islam, and I was a real geek, I'm the kind who would stay up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm reading Plato. Plato's Republic, oh my gosh, a great book. And that's what I spent my time doing, 3-hour arguments about appleness. What is the essence of an apple? Love that kind of stuff. So I came into Islam in pursuit of truth. And I'm a Muslim because I haven't found something that dislodges that. I came into Islam as a balm for my heart and a cure to my hatred of my white brothers and sisters. And then I met Muslims, and I can tell you it's problematic because Muslims are people. Muslims are racist. Not all Muslims are racist, but not all people are racist. Muslims are not immune from humanity and the falls of being a human. The hijab was also something that was freedom for me, because as a university student, I was the president of the Black African Students Association at McMaster University. So I would get up and I would do talks and I would do discussions and blah, 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 and I would just wear the wrong things. So nobody would listen to what I was saying, they would just be checking me out, right? And I found out that, if I wore hijab, that wouldn't happen. So that's why I started wearing hijab before I became a Muslim. Just so that I could have my dignity and so that I could be heard rather than seen. That is the literal way how I came into hijab. Islam followed that. So I found it as a real centering for freedom and liberation for me as a female, as a Black woman, as somebody who is very, very conscious of race, of microaggressions, and of oppression. I have to say that race, as we know it, it's a real lie. And what has happened is that race is the child of racism, not the father. Okay? So by that I mean, race does not cause racism. Racism causes our society to be structured along lines of race. Before we had racism, we were more in line with Islamic teachings, and we were structured along lines of piety and good conduct. That's the real structuring of humanity in its real essence, and it's more in keeping with what is going to happen when you stand before God on the day of judgment. It makes no sense to align people based on race, which is a social construct, when really that's not what you're going to be held accountable to on the day of judgment. Better you stratify people based on conduct and intent than on race. So The other thing that I always notice is when people speak, speaking is very, 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 very important. Words are important. The meaning of words is important. It's really important. Because people say things like, oh, such and such happened because you're black. I can tell you, nothing has ever happened in my life because I'm black. Nothing bad has ever happened in my life because I'm black. Bad things have happened in my life because other people are racist. And by that, and why I word it like that is because I think it's essential to name the problem. And if we say something happened because I'm black, then you're naming my blackness as a problem. My blackness is not a problem. My skin has never caused me a day's trouble, except for a little bit of eczema. That's a problem. I don't have a problem with my black skin. My black skin is not a problem. No one's skin color is a problem. Racism is a problem. So when we situate the problem where the problem lies, we can then address it. So we must not use words like such and such happened because she's black. No, such and such happened because you're a racist. That's what you need to work on, not the black skin. We have racism in Islam. We have racism everywhere that we have people. We have racism in such a permeating social cancer that black people are racist against black people. That's how sad it's gotten. That is how steep it is. And by the time a human being is 3 years old in North America and probably Europe, they're aware of race. And they know who is better than who. Because they've seen TV, they've gone to the stores, they've seen the Barbie dolls, they've seen the baby dolls, they know there's no black dolls unless you actually really look for them. You can't even buy a greeting card that has a black child's face on it when somebody has a baby. It's always a blonde kid. One little lick of blonde hair. Like I gotta buy that for my grandbaby. What's that about? You know my grandbaby's not blonde, right? Okay? So these are the reasons why Muslims are racist, because Muslims live in the world. And because our world is so saturated with the social cancer of racism that it has entered into the minds of every single human being on the face of the earth, except for those who have woken up, have been conscious enough in their understanding of what's happening around them, to have taken the chemotherapy and the radiation treatments and the critical thinking to eradicate racism from their souls. So, there's a problem, and the problem is not situated on my shoulders, although that's where people place it. The problem for racism and the problem for sexism is not ours to bear. It's to be borne by all of us, and it's supposed to be especially carried by people who are in positions of power and who are male and who are white. If whites and males don't carry the problem of racism and sexism on their shoulders, not a change will be made. And that is why the name McGill University is still here today, because the people who are sitting in positions of power have decided not to remove it. Could you imagine the other day people were up in arms about Donald Trump's name being on a building that he paid for, but they have not questioned why McGill is called McGill? Wow, we got a lot of work to do. Thank you for your time. Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Akilah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Good. That was a brilliant talk, and it's a tough act to follow. I think there are a couple of things I want to kind of just continue on from the thread that Akilah was talking about and move you towards the concept and the idea of gender. Relating it to Islam, but also perhaps reversing it a bit. I think the essence of Akilah's talk that I want to kind of adopt into my talk as well is the idea of social critique. Now, the introduction today threw out a whole bunch of buzzwords that oftentimes has created this moral panic against Muslims in media. And politicians and general media discourse is always quick to just grab these words and use it as a way of saying those Muslims, they're scary, they hate women. Well, reality is that the majority of converts today are women. The reality is women step into Islam despite the fact that the media often targets women and often Islamophobic attacks are often against women specifically. Now, just think about that for a moment. The idea that women, Muslim women, are targeted in Western societies as being the oppressed. At the same time, they're also the symbol of who we should be scared of. And we, I don't mean me, by we I mean the mainstream society. So let's take it from that point on. I personally never lived in Saudi Arabia. I've never been there. I've never lived in a society that restricts me from driving a car. I'm very fortunate in that. I was born and raised in Denmark, of all places, the happiest place on earth, so people say. Now, I've lived in Canada for the past 6 years, and the longer I'm away from Denmark, the longer I'm away from the happiest place on earth, the more critical I am towards the society there. The more critical I am towards the society I've come to, the more critical I am towards the society, Canada, that's been nothing but welcoming, that's helped me through my PhD, that's been a home for me raising my family. Now, I point this out because it's important for us to highlight the critique that we must have when we engage with society, when we engage with public discourse. Now, important as well to mention, and I urge you guys to, after I finish talking, and I'm going to try not to talk for that long because I'm really interested in what you have, what questions you may sitting with and want us to engage with. But I urge you to ask me those questions. Why can't women drive in Saudi Arabia? I most likely will have the same question as you guys have. But in my research, now I've researched Muslims. I'm in Denmark and I've researched them here in Canada. And I specifically focused on young adults, not just women. I include men as well. And from those conversations I've had with these young people, from engaging in their lives and trying to understand their realities, growing up in Denmark, growing up in Canada, I've come to realize that oftentimes, although politicians, media, and the public generally wants to make Islam as a religion the bad guy when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to women being marginalized and restricted. When I refer back to the conversations I've had with young women, they often never referred back to Islam as the limiting factor in their lives. Oftentimes it's been the discourse around them that's forced them into such marginal positions that they had to reconsider whether or not they could live a fulfilling life and be accepted by their peers if there were hijab. Now, this isn't a liberal society. This isn't a society that prides itself in saying women are free to choose and do whatever they want with their bodies, with their minds. And here we have young women who are questioning whether or not this free society actually has room for them. Think of it this way. I'm a PhD student. As part of my degree, I must teach university undergraduates. my aspiration in life, my career dreams, would be to teach a classroom of undergrads, believe it or not. Now, my husband is down the same career path as me. He's also an academic, also eager to teach undergrads, crazy as that sounds. Now, a couple of years ago, here in Quebec, we had the charter debates. The essence of the charter debate was to question religious symbols in public space. Now, my hijab, my headscarf, is a religious symbol. My husband has a beard, but that might as well be a hipster beard for all you guys know. So in this context of a discourse of freedom, a discourse of values, of inherent Quebec values, if values can be inherent, the idea is that a woman wearing the headscarf, wearing the hijab, should not be in a teaching position, should not even be allowed to be in an official position within a public space. However, a male version of that woman can move around in public space as he sees fit. Now, what I want you guys to think with that, I want you guys to start to critically understand what's being fed to us about who the Muslim woman is. For that matter, who the Muslim man is as well. Because in my conversations with young Muslim men, although they really wanted to support their sisters in their struggles during the charter debates in Quebec especially, in Denmark we have other issues and I can go into them as well if you want to. They had admiration for the sisters in religion because they were at the forefront of the battle. They could easily hide away by just trimming their beards or putting a nice gel on their beards and making it look proper. The question that Muslim men face is more a question of ethnicity. They look Arabs, they look Pakistani, they look like the pictures we see depicted of the aggressors in Afghanistan and wherever we see them. So they're the aggressors, they're the oppressors. Muslim women are the oppressed. Now there's a very irrational approach within public discourse when it comes to these ideas and these concepts. Because although the Muslim man is seen as the oppressor and the aggressor, although the reality is the majority of Muslim men, at least the ones I spoke to, really were struggling with that idea, trying to figure out how to change people's perception of them. The Muslim woman is often the ones who are being targeted. The Muslim woman is often the one who is bypassed when it comes to a position in the workplace. Now, how do we get around that? I don't live in Saudi Arabia. My grandparents are from Yemen. I've never been there. I do not know the restrictions that women face in those societies. I haven't felt it on my own body. I know they exist. I've read about it. It's terrible. And I feel for my sisters in those countries. But before I can change anything that's going on in distant places, which I really have no power in doing, I must and I need to engage with people around me, force them to think and reconsider what is it within our society that prides itself on being tolerant, on being diverse. What are the inherent structures within this society that we're a part of right now that require us to be critical of people in power, of people with voices? Because there's a problematic understanding if we're forcing the people we quote unquote want to help into the margins of society. Imagine that the Charter of Values actually happened and it became illegal to wear the hijab. Can you imagine a society like that says you as a woman, you're free for all purposes in every sense of the word. However, if you do not conform to our mainstream norms of what it means to be free, if you have a different impression or a different concept of freedom, then you can't be part of our public space. You must find a different way to express yourself, or you can just be invisible. Is that really a society that is liberal? To ask a woman to be invisible? Now, amongst my participants, a few of them, before I interviewed them, some of them after I interviewed them, actually chose to take off the hijab. Now, the hijab as a detail is not important. This is a spiritual connection between you and God. This is a way the majority of Muslim women who wear the hijab will express it. This is a part of my spiritual identity. To choose to suppress that spiritual connection because the public are antagonizing you, that is something that is shameful for the society we're a part of. It's a shame that we live in a society where a minister, I don't remember what she was, I think she was a gender minister in France, equating the choice of wearing hijab with slaves being okay with slavery. Now this is the concept of freedom that she says that we in France have freedom, but we have to formulate some people's freedom for them because they do not have the capacity to understand what freedom means. We are more civilized to teach them what civilization is. If that's not colonial discourse, then I don't know what is. This is actually a very historical phenomenon, this idea that we need to civilize the barbarian. I'm an anthropologist, I know, this is anthropology history. So I think I don't want to spend too much time in delving into all of these issues because honestly I find Akilah really hit the nail on the head with referring to race and the importance of social critique that we must engage with. Now, I just want to kind of steal those points and saying we can say the same thing in terms of gender. And I want to underline the idea that in Islam, as race doesn't matter, gender, in essence, in front of God, doesn't matter. We have social roles that we're all responsible and will be held accountable for in front of God. If I have money, I will be held accountable for how I spend that money. If I am a mother, I will be held accountable for how I treat my children. Likewise, if I am a father. So, and with that, the religious prescriptions of prayer, of worship, is the same for men and women. So in front of God, the deeds are the same. In front of the world, the social context really oftentimes restricts the liberty and the opportunities of women. And I think Western society has oftentimes been on the offensive in terms of looking at the rest of the world and the way they see women. But I think it's really important, especially in today's society where we do live in a diverse community. We need to question the concepts of freedom, the concepts of liberty for everyone. What does that essentially entail? Do we have space for different expressions of beliefs, of spirituality? Or do we have a sense of need for conformity? And with conformity, forcing people to marginalize. I think with that, I really just want to open the floor to you guys and ask you, I welcome any critical questions you have towards Islam and its position on gender. But likewise, I invite you to also have the same questions about taken for granted notions that you have.
So we're just going to open the rest of this up to Q&A, and then we'll end for Maghrib. So do we have any questions here tonight? If you have a question, sure, just get up and with a loud voice. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I have a question pertaining to three things really: social integration, frames of reference, and faith. My name is Rabia. I'm a Lebanese Muslim. I made Canada my home about 3 months ago. So I'm wondering what could be personal tips that you could give me, or what does Islam prescribe for me as an Arab, coming from a background where racism and sexism are pervasively and permeatedly there without people realizing it if they don't move out of it. What could I do in order to balance living my faith fully in this new context of liberal, open society, while at the same time fitting in socially? Since as a Muslim, I'm always going to be casted as the other.
Which one of you would like to take that?
I can start. I think that's a very good question. I think a lot of immigrants coming from non-Western societies often question that. How do you fit in a society that's in many ways very different from the one you come from? Now, I think there's a level of cultural relativity that our religion permits. Now, I personally hold true to a very orthodox understanding of what Islam is, meaning that I find there's a root to Islam. The root being worshiping God as one. The root being holding certain prescriptions as holy, praying, and so on. There's a certain essence of Islam that we can strengthen our relationship to. And I think with that, having an openness towards the society that you live in. Now, luckily, Canada, in many ways, is such an inclusive society. That identity of being a Canadian is so inclusive that it gives you the freedom to formulate your own version of what it means to be Canadian if you are a contributing member of society. Now, with that perspective, you know, being part of an inclusive society, that means that you're actually able to give space to other people expressing their beliefs, their ideologies. And so there's this relativity that live and let live, right? At the same time, that doesn't mean that you should let go of your own principles. Whether they're religious or not, I find there's a lot of space for you to formulate what it means for you to be Canadian. Now, I speak for myself as a Dane. Believe it or not, people oftentimes when they ask me where are you from and I say Denmark, they question if I'm serious or not, because I'm not white, I don't have blue eyes. The majority of Danes do, they have blonde hair, blue eyes, and all of that. But so what? Me being here in Canada means that my Danishness is still there. I see it when I converse with other Canadians because there's something that I'm taking with me from my home country. Whenever it's summertime, I don't go to Yemen, a place that I've never visited. I go to Denmark. I go back to Copenhagen, to the place I was born and raised. I like my licorice because that's the candy I grew up with. There's something that is part of my cultural fabric that I've, with years, reformulated because now I like poutine as well, right? And I think with that, you know, identity is something that's processual. That's something that develops with time. And that's okay. And our religion, Islam, allows for that. Islam, in its essence, is a universally comprehensive religion, meaning that it respects the cultural varieties that the world has. That gives you a lot of free space to develop.
Do we have any other questions? Or Akilah, do you want to add?
I would just
to
like to add to that. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, I would just like to add to that to say, if you're here, I don't know if you have children or if you will have children, but that is one of the things that brings a wrinkle to a lot of immigrants' fabric, is having children who you might want to situate as being like you, because they're your children, but they really are Canadian, right? So you will see a lot of the social integration that you mentioned happening at a very fast rate if you have children, right? And they will not understand what you're saying. And when you talk about back home, it's like, whatever, we've never even been there. And if you even take them, they'll be like, yeah, we've been there for 1 month, right? So whatever, we're Canadian. So that's something, that social integration is about finding a way to be Muslim. And it's interesting because, I mean, as somebody who was not raised to be Muslim and who accepted Islam at age 24, I can say it really is about finding your way and finding what fits for you and making it fit for you. I remember when I first came into Islam, people told me I can't wear colors except for, you know, black, dark blue, gray, and dark brown, and I did that. I did that for years. And then I realized, you know, I have a soul that's orange. So I started wearing a lot of orange. Like, I gotta wear orange, I'm very sorry, I have to wear orange. I just didn't wear it here today, but I need orange in my life, right? And that's okay. So being able to find what works for you, it's important. You talked about the racism and the sexism that is such a part of your culture back home, and that was just taken for granted. And what do you do about that? I think what you do about that once you recognize something is to learn more about it, to critically look at it, and then once you really understand it critically, to teach it to others. Because it's the responsibility of all of us to work to eradicate the social cancer of those isms, you know, racism, sexism. And if you don't work towards eradicating it, it's gonna cover you too, because it's a social cancer, right? And the oppression of one person is also your oppression. Because if you oppress me, you lose a part of your own humanity through doing that. And that's what our Islam teaches us, right? You can't oppress other people, you wrong your own soul. So I think if you recognize those things from your home country, it is about looking at it critically, understanding how it came to be, working to eradicate it within yourself, and then teaching others.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes?
I just have a question about the message of Islam's view on women, how it affects men. So women wear the hijab to cover the hair and the skin, and in my understanding at least is that it's to prevent men having desires towards them, and so I feel like that kind of sends a message to men that it's their nature to have these sexual desires towards women, seeing their shoulders, their chest, their hair, and then it kind of almost is a construct that kind of creates these desires that these men might have. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you touch upon. Before, I think important to understand is I tried to kind of convey this, but it may not have come out so clearly. But the idea is, in front of God, we're all responsible for each of our actions. Meaning that men are responsible for whatever actions they have, whether it's their desires of looking at other women, whether you're covered from top to toe, men can have desires towards you. So the hijab shouldn't be seen in relation to men. The hijab should be seen in relation to God. Even though some women may explain it as this is a way to protect me in the society and so on and so forth, it doesn't really. I've been in Egypt several times where I've been covered from head to toe. And that did not help matters whatsoever. So I know that hijab doesn't prevent sexism. Hijab doesn't prevent men from looking at you. That's not why I wear hijab. Hijab is an act of obedience towards God, not towards men. And I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. Now, the hijab, when it becomes about people, about how other people observe me, how other people look at me, then it's rid of its essential character. The essence of the hijab is an act of worship towards God. And I think that is what needs to be brought back into the conversation. Because we oftentimes highlight the fact that it's a way of, it's a critique against the objectifying women and women's sexuality. And yes, that's inherently also part of the hijab. Hijab as a sign of modesty, as a sign of I demand respect on my premise, can be a way of combating sexual objectivity of women. But there are other ways of doing that. You know, I have, you know, many of my friends who adhere to a feminist ideology, they combat sexual objectification in their ways. So hijab can be seen as a political symbol towards a critique of the objectification of women. But the essence of it, I don't wear the hijab because of that. I wear the hijab because I want to please God. So there's different levels of the hijab that we can look into. We can look into the social repercussions. We can look into the social message that I bring forward with the hijab. And there is a social message to it. I say that women demand respect based on their merits, based on their person, their personhood, their identity. But that doesn't mean that a woman who doesn't wear hijab can't bring about that same message in her way, right? So that's the social message. I could have that opinion even if I wasn't wearing the hijab. I have that opinion even when I'm in my private home and not wearing hijab. That is my opinion, that women should not put in that position. Women should be respected no matter what they wear. But the essence of my hijab is purely spiritual for me.
I'd like to say I concur with everything that was said. And I can say we should think about the traditions of the world's religions. And we recognize that you never saw a picture, an image of Mother Mary that didn't have hijab on it. You didn't see it because it doesn't happen. It's not depicted, right? We never saw the nuns without their habit, which is very much like the hijab. We always saw that women cover, Jewish women cover in the same manner that Christian women cover, in the same manner that Muslim women cover. It's just that we're the last one standing. That's all. We're just the last one standing. It's so much so that, I remember going up to a nun I saw shopping, grocery shopping, and she was there buying apples, and I had to go up to her and say, wow, good for you, because she was wearing a habit. When's the last time you saw a nun wearing a habit? Well, I'm from Ontario, I don't know. I know that you guys have a stronger faith community here in Montreal, but in Ontario, you will not see a nun wearing a habit. You will not see it, right? They're wearing clothes like everybody else, just blending in. So Muslim women, we're the last ones standing. We have been called upon as humans to cover and to go forth in the world in modesty, both males and females. And we were all doing that. until someone had a good idea as to say, hey, yo, let's not do that anymore, right? And people said, yeah, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Oh, we forgot. They lost sight of it. They all jumped on the, yeah, let's liberate and yeah, take it off kind of thing. We are the last ones standing, but the thing was never, it was never about men. It was always about service to God. What did God call upon us as human beings to do? And to be, to maintain our dignity. So I think it's like that's how it is for me. For me, it's first to serve God, to do what God has asked me to do. Second, to maintain my dignity as a woman and to, you know, elevate myself. And if men can't see, well, that's fine for me too. But again, it's never been a protection really. Because, you know, if they want to come and check you, they'll come and check you anyway. Still have comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a thank you for that question. As someone who's been wearing the hijab for 7 years now, I've definitely asked myself that question. And at least my interpretation of the faith is I always go back to the Quran. And I pulled up the reference here, chapter 24, verse 30, and this is the verse that where the hijab was first mentioned. And I always, in my reading of it, I find it curious that the chapter starts by saying, and tell men to lower their gaze. And then it tells women that they should cover. And I think there's a very interesting placement of responsibility here, that the responsibility of modesty and sexual conduct is not entirely placed on one gender. That before you can expect women to conduct themselves in a certain way, men must also conduct themselves in a certain way and respect them and lower their gaze and treat them in a dignified manner. And so I wouldn't say that the placing of the hijab equates to women shouldering the entire responsibility, because if that were the case, I probably wouldn't have been able to wear it for 7 years. So thank you for that question, though. Another question, Hajar?
Yes, it's related to what she said. How can we face those men, especially those Muslim men who think that because someone is not covered or because she's walking a certain way or something, they always find a way to aggress you and you suffer from sexual harassment even though you're covered? How can we face them and make them, like, we tell them, you should respect the woman no matter how she is, no matter how she's acting. Maybe she's just acting because she acts like that, she's born like that, and you see it as a sexual whatever calling to you. How can we tell them this? Because this matter, especially in some Arab countries, when I go back to my home country, I see them, they find some stupid reasons to sexually harass a woman, and nobody stand for that. And when you stand, they look at you like, no, we're doing the right thing. We're telling her to cover or to behave. How do we respond to this behavior?
I would say the Quran already responded to them and tell the believing men to lower their gaze.
Yeah, and even this, they say they should help us.
Yeah, which is
When we say that the men should like lower their gaze, they say, well, when they cover, we can lower our gaze.
some people will not. Some people,
opposite order, but
some people refuse to accept responsibility for their own behavior. And you know, when somebody literally refuses to accept responsibility for their own behavior, which we know we are responsible for, I mean, what are you going to testify? Who am I going to be held accountable for on the day of judgment? Only me, my behavior. So those who refuse to accept responsibility for their own behavior, God help them. And what else are you going to do? You can't force them. You can't make somebody change. You can call them to good conduct, but if they choose not to answer the call to good conduct, then they will behave like the beast that they want to behave like. And the only thing that we can hope for is that in time, inshallah, they'll grow up and they'll see the error of their ways and make amends. But until that such time, I would not waste a lot of my energy on them. If they harass me, though, there is a criminal code of conduct. Is there not? Is there not? Push me and you see if I don't call. I would suggest that if people can't, because this is what happens to people. Those who cannot control themselves are controlled by others, right?
Yes?
If we put ourselves in the minds of the people who are against hijab or
Louder, please.
sorry, if we put ourselves in the minds of people who are against hijab, what do you think is the root cause of them thinking that this is not a good thing? Do you think it's only a sympathetic reaction that you're oppressing yourself, or is there something else? Like,
Do you want to take it or?
I think there's something else.
Yeah.
Can you just repeat the question?
The question was, what do you think is the root cause of people who who are opposed to the hijab? Is it that they are truly concerned about the person who's wearing hijab being oppressed or oppressing themselves? Or is it something else at play? I believe that there's something else at play. I don't believe that anybody would spend so much undue time and energy trying to liberate another person from themselves. I truly believe that, especially in a society where women are being raped and beaten every hour, right? Like, fix your own house. I truly believe that what's at hand is colonialism. And the feeling that some people have that this is their world and that you will do as you're told in their world. And it's really funny to me that the people who are at the vanguard of this movement against hijab came to this land and did not comply with the laws of this land, the cultural norms of this land. They subjugated the people who were here and put their own ideas on what should be done and who should wear what and what kind of system should be set up on top of the people. And now they're saying, we are Canadians and we have the right to decide what Canadians do. But guess what? You're actually not indigenous to this land and you are just an oppressor. You oppressed a group of people and now you're trying to oppress the people who are coming in and saying it's your way or the highway, because your nature is to oppress. And that is because it's been running rampant for so many years unchecked, and it's called colonialism. That's my perspective on it.
I think just to follow up with that, there's a brilliant book written by, I think she's a French feminist, but it's entitled The Politics of the Veil. And it gives you a historical overview of the anti-veil movement in France. And it starts with colonialism, starts with discussing the Algerian rebellion against the French. It talks about how the hijab became one of the symbols of rebellion against the French rule. And then it takes you on towards more present times where hijab is still seen as the barbarian practice of the colonized by the right wing. The left wing are more sympathetic, wanting to liberate the Muslim woman from her own oppression. So you see that whether you're on the right wing or the left wing, whether you're liberal or conservative, you still see the hijab as problematic. It's just the difference between seeing it as a sign of oppression or a sign of being civilized, right? So no, it's not all about sympathies from the sweet feminists. It's also about conforming to the ideals that certain societies have of what it means to be a liberal woman, of being a free woman. So.
You mentioned lots of issues today, and over the last 2 decades, especially with the rise of the internet, do you think these issues have gotten better or worse?
Could you just repeat that a bit louder?
I said we discussed lots of issues today, and do you think that over the last 2 decades with the rise of the internet, did things get better or worse? And what can we do about it?
It's a good question. So the question is, if people in the back can't hear it, is with the rise of the internet, has these issues that we've been discussing today gotten better or worse? I don't know. I think there's access to the information. There's access to the right information, but there's also access to a lot of wrong information. There's access to a lot of opinions. So I think people have become more aware of issues. Whether or not they've become more educated, I think it depends on what groups of people you talk about, what interests they have in, because it's not really access to information that's the problem. You know, before the internet, we had libraries. The question is, whether or not people are interested in engaging with other ways of thinking. How we can actually deal with these things, I don't have. It's basically whether or not you have the answer to world peace. I don't know. How can you make people realize that they need to be inclusive and open-minded of difference of opinion?
If I may just follow up on that, could I?
Sure, can you just let Sister Akilah answer too? So do you want to add
I was going to say that I think things are pretty well status quo. And I don't mean it absolutely. I think that people have learned, but like the sister was saying, there's a lot of information that's wrong as well. But if you look at the whole structure of things, I think it's pretty well status quo, because the changes that have been made and the advances in education and knowledge exchange and all of that kind of thing, as because of the internet and the speed at which you can obtain information, has probably resulted in a few people who were willing learning more. The people who are tenacious in their ignorance are still as ignorant, because it doesn't matter what you teach them. They reject truth and knowledge because they're tenacious in their ignorance. They will not learn. They will not, and they will not change. And the reason for that, I believe, is because things are working fine for them as they think. Because some people think that this is the only thing that's happening here in the dunya, in this world. And so for as long as things are going okay for them, they don't want to disrupt and agitate towards social justice. I don't think we're any closer to social justice today than we were 2 decades ago, okay? I think more people have information, more access to information is easier, but social justice is pretty well status quo. And until people who are in positions of power, can you imagine people in positions of power wanting to disrupt power systems that oppress others? When that happens, we'll see some movements towards social justice and world peace and the end of hunger and all the rest of that.
And how do we, as regular people, move forward towards that goal?
How does David slay Goliath and his whole family? David needs some friends, right? And I honestly, I think, because I think that we are divided as humans, and I think this racism and gender, these isms really help to divide us. I think for as long as we remain under these isms, we'll never see the true enemy, which really is capitalism, and really is, colonialism, and the positioning as one ideology as superior over all humans, period, end of statement. You know what I mean? And the fact that the President of the United States of America is more important than all of the presidents of all the other countries holding hands together because he can press the red button. These are the systems. It's just huge systems that we have to contemplate to change. And the only way that we could do that, I think, is through really breaking down interpersonal barriers and being able to have critical views of what really is happening around you and why. But I don't know what that's going to happen. It's not going to happen while I'm here, I don't think. Revolution. It's not going to happen while I'm here. People are too busy on their iPads for a revolution.
Did you want to add something?
Just a quick point. I think the problem with the internet is the issue of how things get viral. And these days, the loudest voices that get viral are the negative voices, are the ignorant voices. It's similar to any public space where there's exchange of information, to any media where something is broadcast. The negative, controversial, is more sensational. So that's exactly what's happening when it comes to Islam. The headlines are about a Muslim woman getting oppressed, which could be something completely away from the truth. So I guess to answer the questioner's question, it's all about counterbalancing that viral effort by doing things that are worthy of coverage, that become viral by their own right, but it's an uphill battle, unfortunately.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Thank you both. I'm sorry if I'm asking something you've already covered because I came in late, but I'm just wondering, you spoke about the hijab as a connection between a woman and God, but I was wondering what you both thought about the use of the hijab as a political tool. And I asked this also because in Iran, for example, where they're choosing not to wear the veil, but then in Turkey where they were supposed to, no, where they were not allowed to, but then they choose to, so then, like, in relation to the state. So I was just wondering what you both thought as a...
I think there's something highly, highly problematic when a state government tries to force and enforce something, religious prescriptions on a population. And I think with that, with forcing the hijab on the female population in Iran and in other places, you're really you're taking away the essence of what hijab is. It's not supposed to be enforced on a woman. It's supposed to have spiritual significance. And I remember having this conversation with a young woman from Iran who saw the hijab as evil. It was the means of oppressing her in her upbringing in Iran. Now, I felt for her. I've been so lucky to be born and raised in a country where it wasn't enforced upon me. I had the time and the access to actually figure out what it means to me as an individual. What agency do I have in choosing or not choosing it? And I think when you take away that agency, you take away that choice of a woman, of a spiritual, what's supposed to be a spiritual choice, what is supposed to be a worshiping choice, you're taking away the meaning of that symbol. Now, hijab can and is a political symbol. In Turkey, it's become a symbol of rebelling against the government. Young Turkish women, I remember now they've become more lenient towards it, but just a few years ago when I was traveling, I would meet Turkish women who had moved away from their families, something that their families would never have considered letting them do. Traveling abroad to study, to go to university. Can you think of forcing a woman to not wear hijab and then forcing her to make the choice of saying, I'm going to go abroad because this choice was mine. Same way as women in Iran who are choosing to go away from Iran, or choosing, there's interesting studies that show these very implicit actions against the regime in Iran to kind of navigate and create strategies to create their own agency, because that choice has been taken away from them. It's disconnecting the hijab from its true essence, and I think that's hugely problematic.
I absolutely agree. It is not to be used in that manner. It is therefore, being used actually as a tool of oppression rather than as a spiritual expression, connection to God, and personal freedom. It's just totally wrong, absolutely wrong. It's just the same as forcing somebody to pray. How helpful is it to force someone to pray? It's totally messed up. So that's not the way it's supposed to be. I can say as somebody who, I put hijab on myself. I'm the only person in my family who's a Muslim. I have a very large family, and I mean my original family, not my constructed family through marriage. But I have a very large family, and I'm the only one in hijab, and I did it to serve God. But depending on what's happening in the world and what the media is putting on their stations, sometimes when I leave my house, I feel like it's also a form of resistance. and it's also a political statement because it's been made complicated through the political climate. It's actually a form of bravery, and I feel like it's a flag, depending on where I go, it's a flag of Islam, because sometimes I go in spaces where I'm the only one wearing it, like work. There are Muslim women being attacked in Toronto after the bombing in France, and I wear my hijab and leave my house, it's a precarious thing where you walk out your door and you don't know if you're safe. And I've had those conversations, saying, is it smart? Is it smart to walk like this, alone, following these incidents? So in those moments, it becomes an act of bravery, a flag, a form of resistance. It's just a whole bunch of things. But really, I was doing it to serve God.
Thank you. Questions? For gender parity.
I just had a question concerning the gender equality in Islam. So I know in the eyes of God, women and men are equal. But culturally speaking, coming from an Arab country, a woman is still looked at as just a woman, and you always feel very inferior when a man is talking to you, or when in like any in different situations. So I want to know how can that be changed? How can that mentality be changed? If Islam is giving the rights, it's giving the equal rights for women and men, and we go to those Muslim countries and we see the complete opposite, where women are not considered in the same level as men.
I think it's highly problematic that certain societies overlook the capacity and potential of their female citizens. I think one thing we can do within our Muslim Canadian community is to actually make sure that it doesn't happen within our own communities, giving women their voices. And I'm saying this because we don't have to go far away. We can actually stay within our own Montreal Muslim community. Mosques here in Montreal are struggling to acknowledge their female voices. The majority of mosque boards in Montreal do not have female voices. And I think that's where we, as women of our community, need to step up, need to demand our voices to be heard. The MSAs of Montreal are very good at incorporating women and including women's voices. This needs to go beyond the university environment. It needs to go, and it needs to saturate the fabric of our Muslim community in Montreal. Now, I know this is a Western phenomenon. In Denmark, we're struggling with the same issues of acknowledging women's voices. There are other strategies that the women there have been able to acquire, to take control, quote unquote, of their mosques. That's something we need to work on establishing here before we can think of countries abroad. Now, Arab countries have huge issues with acknowledging their female voices. I personally do not live in those societies, and it's difficult for me to change them within. I can study them without, I can critique them without, and I can make sure it doesn't happen in my community. I can make sure that my community is better for my daughter's future, that when she grows up, she does not feel silenced by the view that she as a woman should not be heard. I can make sure of that. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with yourself. Are you willing to raise your voice in that scene? Are you willing to say, I demand that my voice is heard? You need to acknowledge that my opinions matter. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with us as women standing up and taking charge. And then it's on the brothers to acknowledge that, acknowledge our potential, acknowledge and push forward. And I think that's where our brothers need to be supportive of our strong women voices within the community, because they do exist.
Right, so as I said before, my understanding is that the problem of sexism is not for women to solve. Because systems do not get disrupted very easily by people who power has been taken from. The problem of sexism is the problem for men to solve. So when men recognize, and if men are truthful, they recognize the subjugation of women and how that has robbed them of parts of their own humanity, and they need to bring that forward, just as the problem of race is not for black people to solve. So the problem lies with those who have power to make the changes, and it needs to be on their lap to move forward. Not just, I mean, clearly and absolutely, it is the voice of women that need to be raised and said, hey, you know, we have to raise the flag. But once you raise the flag, it's the person who has the power who solves the issue, right? Just as how when I call 911 to say there's a fire, I'm not putting it out because I don't have the power to do so. I'm just calling attention to a problem. It's the job of the person who has the power to do so to eradicate the problem. So we need men to solve sexism.
Thank you.
Just a small comment actually on this question, because it's not all Arab countries where you will find problems like that. There are so many Arab countries where you go, and if someone violates your rights, or talks you down or something, you can go and complain about it. And actually also, as you said, if you see something happening like that, under your eyes, you're losing, some of your humanity as well. And so this is actually a little bit connected to democracy and human rights, etc. If you have a society where civil society organizations are up and running, and you have a judicial system out there, then if something like that happens to you, you can go and fight, and you can have people standing with you. So it's actually related. If we see all of those evil things in Arab societies, etc., it's part of it is actually linked to a corrupt system, a corrupt political system where the people, the will of the people is not being fulfilled. So if you have a corrupt judicial system, or you have people being appointed to positions not on merit, etc., then that's the root of the problem. It's not the religion or something.
Thank you. Any more questions on this? Yes, Mr. Fatima. Sorry again.
Oh, sorry, no, he had his hand up before.
It's okay. He's had his hand up for centuries and always been heard. I'm just kidding, Anas. Would you like to go for the question?
Okay. Well, you actually answered part of it, but as someone who grew up in Saudi, and we were always told that you have to respect other races and you have to be, but most racist people are, in my view, are the Saudi people. And they're Muslim and we're all Muslim, so what do you think is really the problem? And you mentioned that we need a white male in power person who can talk. Do you mean like we need examples of the societies to show up and speak up? Because in Saudi there's no white person.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean that. What I meant was, and I don't mean it in the absolute sense that it has to be a white, it has to be a male. I don't mean that. What I meant was people who are in positions of power are the ones who have they have the power to make the changes that are necessary. And so in that way, it takes somebody who, if you're from Saudi Arabia, then you're not. It's the man who's in a position of power, who's in Saudi Arabia. He's the one who has to talk to his people about their issues of racism. It's not the responsibility of the African who is a servant of that man to do so, okay? Because, as they say, it is easier for the lion to decide not to eat the lamb than for the lamb to ask the lion not to eat it. Do you know what I mean? It's the power that the person has that they can move forward to make the changes in the system. I went to Saudi Arabia twice in my life. First time I was not a Muslim. The second time I was making Hajj. And it was an extremely interesting situation because I have my eyes open. And my eyes have been open since I was 6. And I saw the racism. It was absolutely deplorable, as was the sexism. And it is not going to be eradicated by the black guy who's bagging groceries at the end of the till, because he's not even allowed to use the till because they might think he's going to steal, you know, a little bit of money. It's not him, because he has no power. It's going to be the person who owns that grocery store, who's going to have to be the one who makes the changes, who sees the racism as a social cancer in his heart, and who challenges his own thoughts, learns, and then educates others, and then decides, you know what, that guy's going to be manager instead of the bag boy, right? Those are the people who are in positions of power are the ones who have the power to make the changes. They just don't want to because it suits them fine. And this is what I was saying when I say that it suits people fine. A lot of times when I speak, and I speak a lot about racism, white people get mad. Non-blacks get mad. Because I'm calling them out, oh, I feel uncomfortable. That's okay. I've been uncomfortable since I was 6. So if you're uncomfortable for the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm not gonna feel sorry for you. Because until we disrupt power and we disrupt people's feelings of discomfort, poke at things that are sore, we're not gonna make any differences. We're not calling people to be better than they are, right? So it's about poking that thing and making people say, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I don't even know where that came from. I was so shocked when I first heard it. I'm like, I don't even speak that way because I thought being uncomfortable was normal. That's just my life, you know what I mean? So I don't get to say I'm uncomfortable. It's like, I'm alive, therefore I am uncomfortable. So disrupting people's comfort, challenging them for change is what has to happen, because they are the ones who have to make. So it's just the same thing. You have to raise the flag and say there's a problem over here, but where does the power lie to make that change? Until people who are situated in positions of power recognize that more than being uncomfortable with the truth, they are wronging their own humanity. They are losing. There will not be change. See, anybody here ever heard about white privilege?
Yeah.
You heard about, I have a problem with that. Because every single time people go to these white privilege conferences, they come away saying, oh, I have privilege. I recognize, now I recognize that I have privilege. My question is, how is your privilege hurting you? And I've never heard, I've asked every single white person I get the chance, I ask them, how is your white privilege hurting you? And they just say, I don't know. And they've never answered me, none of them. Even equity officers, they don't know how their privilege is hurting them. Until they start to realize how their privilege is hurting them, they're gonna be, who doesn't mind being privileged? I don't mind. I wish I had come first class on that via train. You know, no problem, first class I would go, right? So.
Yeah, I think, you know, what that underlines is the importance that each of us have in voicing social critique.
Yeah.
And I think we may not be people of power, but we each have a responsibility within our own societies to raise that social critique, to engage in critical thought. And I think it sounds much easier than it actually is, because everything around us is raising us and conforming us to not critique, to not think critically of what's going on around us. Now, Saudis have a responsibility to create social critique of their own societies, and therefore, with that social critique, engage in changing the social structures of their societies. We can't do it for them. We can change our own societies by voicing our critique, and that's the starting point. And I think with us being like generally a younger crowd, we do, the future is in our hands to actually promote critical thought, to promote questioning people of power, questioning people who have the speaking space, who have the voices, strongest voices. Why are they allowed to tell us what the truth is? And I think that's where we start. Within our own societies, I think, you know, we can go back to Islam. Allah will not change the state of things until people change within themselves. And if we cannot speak against social injustice, if we can't work against social injustice, we speak against social injustice. If we can't speak against social injustice, at least we hate it in our hearts. And I think if we all go back to that, start changing what's around us, start making the small changes that we're able to do. I think that's the starting point, and then hopefully we can progress.
Thank you. I do want to just add that that Arabs and people in the Middle East don't have a monopoly on sexism and racism, and that I don't want to homogenize all of Saudi or all of the Middle East as being sexist. I do acknowledge that there's incredible diversity in the Middle East, where you have the UAE, where women graduate at sometimes 60% or 75% of grads are women, and higher rates than men. And that at times there's a lot of complexity behind misogyny and sexism, where in Iran, for example, misogyny and sexism is a product of a repressive regime, not so much of a culture. That's where that's inherent too. So I want to just clarify that I don't want to homogenize any culture here.
I think that's a very, very important point.
Yeah.
That I want to concur with.
Thank you.
That's absolutely.
A question? Do you want to pass off any question? Did you have a question earlier?
I was just going to emphasize exactly what you just said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great minds. Yes?
I have a question. When you're fighting for social change, sometimes there's an issue also that you don't really, you're fighting for it, but there's a slippery slope that you're giving into your own desires and your own hatred for whatever the other is. And it was interesting because you mentioned that when you accepted Islam, you were able to forgive the white man and lose that hatred of the. But sometimes when you're fighting for social change, you don't even realize, and it's no more about social change, it's about giving in into your own desires. So how do you resist falling into that trap?
Okay, I would say I spend the vast majority of my waking hours fighting for social justice against school boards and Children's Aid Society in my region. The way that one, at least I think, the way to not make it personal is to have an objective. If you know what you're doing, then you know when you're not doing it. You know what I mean? If you have a goal that is not personal, and you're staying on it, and you're doing it with other people, because you definitely can't do it alone, those are safeguards against making it about you. I could also say that when you're working in a system or fighting for something that is not actually your problem today, I have no children in the school system. My youngest child is 19, but I'm fighting against racism in that school system. That is an elementary, secondary school system. I go to all the meetings, and I fight against the situations that happen to the kids. They're not my kids, so it's not personal. Now, my children have never been in Children's Aid Society, and I've never worked for Children's Aid Society or the school board, so it's not personal. There's an objective that I have. It's based on facts. I go to school meetings and I support her child and your child, but not my child. My children are not there. So that's how it becomes an arm's length relationship and issue. If I'm not employed there, my kids are not there, they've never it's not about me now. So is it about my ego? It could be about my ego if I'm doing it to get my name in the paper, or I'm doing it for some other kind of, but man, it's not even worth that. It's just too much work to be worth that. So I think it's about defining what you're doing, and really, if you're not in it, then you're probably not going to get corrupted by it being about you.
All right, thank you.
There's a question.
Yes, I have a question about a very controversial quotation in the Holy Quran. It's specifically about women, actually. I would like to know how you deal with that. If you have comments or...
With controversial
What is it?
quotes out from the Quran?
It's controversial because it specifically says that if a woman ever comes to disobey her husband, he has to beat her. And in some traductions, they slightly change it for slightly beating her, but it's still there. It says that the man has.
Okay, so the word is daraba. I don't think I'm saying it properly. I don't think people who speak Arabic here are laughing at me. All right.
Oh no.
Okay, but that's what the word is. And some people say that it is to beat, but other people say it is to admonish, or to separate from, to leave a space between, to set aside. So what we know is that when we look at the traditions and the hadith and the sunnah around our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not beat his wives. He absolutely did not. In fact, there are stories about how a man who beat his wife was indeed admonished by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he found his behavior so disgraceful. So it is a controversial part of the Quran, probably the most controversial one, especially when we come about topics like this. But it is not, and I'm no scholar, I must say. I'm definitely not a scholar. I'm definitely not somebody who even understands and reads Arabic. But because there is not a conclusive statement about it being to hit, and it could be to admonish, then we go to and look at the sunnah. We look at the hadith, so that it could frame what that meaning was, and what was the context, and what was the message of the Prophet, and is it in sync with that? That phrase is not in keeping with any of the other. If that phrase means to hit, then it would be an anomaly in the Quran that is not in keeping with any of the other verses regarding interactions with women, or the status of women, or any of that, or the behavior of men, believing men. So if the Quran is a perfect book, it cannot have an anomaly in it. They cannot have a contradiction in it. So we would have to then err on the side of it's probably admonish, not hit. And that is supported and buffered by the Sunnah and the Hadith. And that's as much as I can say about that, because I don't know anything about Islam or Quran or Arabic. I'm not a scholar.
I think I'm gonna just agree. I'm not a scholar either, and I don't have any well enough understanding of the Arabic language, although I do speak Arabic, to be able to interpret the Quran. And I think with that, we need to always go back to the root essence of what Islam stands for, right? I think with everything we know of Islam, everything we know of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and everything we know of the way that God refers to men and women in the Quran, it does not equate with the abuse of one gender, as that translation of the Quran suggests. And we oftentimes are put in positions to deal with translations of the Quran the way people who are not first language Arabic speaker and not first language English speakers have translated Quran front to back. If we want to understand the Arabic of the Quran, we need to understand a translation of those words in Arabic before we can refer and discuss the concepts in English. And I think that's where I oftentimes just withdraw myself from a debate that focuses on a translation of Quranic verse taken out of context of the entire religion. Because if we put everything in context of the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying the best of men are the best towards their families, then it does not make sense that a man should hit his wife. It does not equate with everything that Islam is in terms of justice. So obviously you'll find scholars who will interpret and translate the Quran according to their own understandings and giving them the benefit of the doubt. They may not know any better. But the way we as individual Muslims must meet Islam and meet the Quran and meet the interpretations of Islam is with the essence of God's justice. It's with the essence that we will be held accountable for any oppression, any wrongdoing we do against any living and unliving thing in this world. Our hands will witness against us. How can I hit another person, let alone my spouse, if my hands will witness against me? And I think that's just a point.
Last question of the night. Go for it.
Maybe speaking of the violence against women, we often hear in the media, allegations of blood mutilations on women. Can you speak to that? Is that something?
Female mutilation.
Female genital mutilation.
Exactly. Is that? Can you speak to that? Like, is that something prescribed in the religion of Islam?
Amani, you want to take that?
Yeah, because it's a very easy question to answer because it does not make sense in an Islamic context to promote the idea of female genital mutilation.
So how did it come to be associated?
It's well, because it does exist, and it exists in those areas. It existed pre-Islam and it exists after Islam. But within an Islamic context, Muslims may conduct this cultural practice, but within an Islamic context, it does not make sense because in the relationship between a man and his wife, there's supposed to be satisfaction on both parts. And if you're promoting female genital mutilation and understand what it entails as the way it's practiced today, it removes any potential for a woman to reach satisfaction in that relationship. So the idea that female genital mutilation is part of Islam, it goes contradictory to the essence of the teachings that we have in our religion in terms of the relationship between spouses, between a man and a wife.
And I just want to add just a few things on that. Female genital mutilation is a regional phenomena, meaning it's mainly practiced in Africa, and it's totally exogenous to Islam. It's practiced at highest rates in East Africa. So you'll find it practiced a lot of times in Somalia and in Ethiopia and Eritrea. In Ethiopia and Eritrea, it's practiced almost similar rates between Christian and Muslim communities. Same goes with West Africa. And so it's, in fact, actually, coincidentally, in Arabic, it's called, in Sudan, it's practiced at high rates too, and the Arabic word for it is khitan fir'auni. And khitan means genital mutilation, or like circumcision. Fir'auni means pharaonic, coming from the era of the pharaohs. So they've traced it back to literally 3,000 years ago as a practice that was done by the pharaoh against the children of Israel to keep their birth control. It was a very harsh form of birth control. So it's funny, the few Arab countries that actually do practice female genital mutilation are the African Arab countries. And there's a whole field of anthropology that studies it. Is it a rite of passage for some girls? Because it's treated as sometimes there's a very interesting American anthropologist I can look up for you later. She did her dissertation on it in West Africa, and she grew up in the United States and actually went back when she was 18 and decided to do it herself as a rite of passage. And it's very shocking she did it. But her view is actually that in a lot of these cultures, it's viewed as a rite of passage in the same way that getting your braces is a necessary evil to growing up. So it's a very cultural phenomena that predated Islam and endured way after Islam. Yeah? Did you have anything else, Akilah, to add on to that?
Only to say, absolutely not part of Islam. That's it.
So we've come to an ending today. I'm just going to give the mic to our speakers to say their closing comments. Thank you.
I think I just want to thank you all for coming and asking such really important questions. And I think it's important that we have a dialogue and put words on these concepts. And maybe also take the discourse back, bring it back into a forum where we can have an open-minded conversation across the board, whether we're Muslims or not Muslims, and question what the discourse tries to convey. What are the essential problematics in understanding the Muslim woman in the light that she's represented in today's society, within our society? And I think with that, I just want to thank you guys for showing up on a Friday evening and engaging in this debate. I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank Akilah, Sister Akilah, for her talk as well. I think it was encouraging and eye-opening to actually put words into our minds of how to talk about this, give us a way to approach these difficult topics in an open forum. And thank you to the organizers as well. Jazakumullah khair for this amazing event.
I will leave off tonight with a few questions and then a statement. So my questions are, what is a template and how does it impact form? Is racism, which built nations, a social template? Question number 2, how do you live the privilege of not knowing and understanding? And what does this ignorance cost you? And what does it cost others? Number 3, what is the purpose of racism? And how does it benefit those in power? 4, what is the impact of equity on privileged people? And what are the attendant costs over time and generations? 5, what will those in power do to maintain their power? Do they have boundaries that they will not cross in their quest to maintain it? So I would just like to close in saying that the silence of good ethical people is the biggest problem to the reign of overt racists. And that Islam came to combat the replication of existing systems of ignorance, social systems that were built on ignorance. Islam came to shake those systems up and to avoid having them replicated. And we are challenged today in that we have a society that is more educated than ever before. All across the world, people are more literate today than they ever were before. And yet we still replicate systems based on ignorance. So Islam challenges us to swim against the tide and follow and swim against the ways of our foreparents, to disrupt traditions of ignorance and to live in accordance with truth. So I would like to challenge, all of us, myself included, to do just that, to swim against the tide and to follow a quest for truth which will then lead us ultimately to freedom and its attendant social justice. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for the organizers and my sister, Amani, sorry. It's been a nice evening. I enjoyed the questions. And I really don't like when these things end and then people just walk away and it's like, let's go for pizza. I think we need to take it with you. You know what I mean? Take it with you. At least commit to taking one statement with you.